My name is Adam Kennaugh, and I am a collaborative composer. Join me in the search for a career in classical music. This is the Making Noise podcast. All right, fantastic, man, fantastic. Yeah, it's been kind of interesting lately. I mean, like, I don't know how you've been feeling with COVID and stuff. It's I don't know. I guess it's like everything's opening up now, but at the same time, we're all still kind of like, what, should we be going out?
Yeah,
You
for
know?
sure.
And I don't know, how are you feeling with that? Because you're in Florida, right?
Yeah. It's been interesting. I'm getting to the point where I need to go out, a little bit just because I'm going a little stir crazy. So like for instance, some people may frown on this, but my sister and I went to Universal recently,
Mm.
and like we followed all their safety precautions and everything, and we both didn't get sick. So there's ways to go out and be safe and make sure that you do get that mental health energy you need because like we've been inside for all summer and that's pretty rough. So make sure for me, like I've needed to do some stuff like that where I need to go out, but um yeah, I mean it hasn't been terrible, but I'm getting to the point now where I'm getting a little over it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that, man. And that's important. I think that's something with COVID too, during this whole time with like when the quarantine happened and stuff is
Hmm.
people are starting to realize like, wow, I really need to, like you said, like focus on my mental health,
Yeah.
and being cooped up like this for so long, I don't think that it's natural for us.
No, for sure. Yeah, especially the people who are a little bit more extroverted.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why I was saying a moment ago, like it's challenging to try to navigate like how much should I be doing, or where should I be going, where shouldn't I be going,
Hmm.
and I totally know what you're saying with wanting to go to places and be like, well, let's go. I'm
Yeah.
tired. I'm tired of being inside. Do you find like you have to remind yourself certain days to go outside, or is it just
Oh,
like now?
100%. Yep. I mean, my default mode is potato mode, so it's like if I'm not consciously thinking about doing stuff, I will just sit there all day.
Right. Well, I think I also feel like that's kind of part of being a musician, especially a college trained musician.
Hmm.
We're so used to being in our little boxes, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
So how do you do you have any sort of way where you're like, okay, uh like something that reminds you to go outside or like at least be a person?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, being a person. Yeah. I like have an Apple Watch and that has like little reminders to stand up and like activity stuff that it reminds you to do.
Mm,
And that's not like a ton of activity, but like going on a walk every day, that's enough to fulfill the requirements of most of the time of what the Apple Watch asks you to do. So little
yeah.
things like that where it's just like little reminders to actually get up and get out. And then my roommate has a dog, so we'll go walk the dog every night or a couple weeks a night,
Oh
a
my
couple
God.
days a week. There we go.
Yeah, well, having a dog is like that's like a natural reminder that you have to
Yeah,
go
for sure.
outside. Unless you have like a fenced-in yard, you could just open the door and be like,
Lazy
go.
mode, yeah.
And that's only just reinforcing the whole musician mentality.
Really though.
I wonder, like, how are you do you do much jazz at all?
Not really at all, no.
I kind of wonder if jazz musicians are a little bit opposite to classical performers, like where they are more extroverted in a way.
Potentially. I don't know. I almost feel like jazz takes more time to practice to get like really good. I don't know, because you have to like improvise in all 12 keys and like do that flawlessly all the time. So I don't know. I have no clue. I haven't seen any correlation with that.
Yeah, I haven't either. I just sort of thought about that, because it's like part of jazz is the improvisation and doing it on the spot, like,
Yeah.
and the jazz environment, like going to a club and stuff and performing, it's so much more looser, you
Yeah,
know.
that's true.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine talking about posture as
Mm,
an instrumentalist, and we were talking about how in jazz I never studied jazz, so I don't know. It's just pure speculation. But is that much of a discussion? Because they're going from, if they're in a big band, they're going from sitting down to standing up and soloing, or they're just kind of like standing there off to the side, like tapping along, and like specifically for instruments like the baritone saxophone, right?
mm,
That's one that it's like that weighs you down.
yeah. Yeah, I
So
feel like posture is definitely something that is talked about more often now in the classical world. I have no clue about the jazz world because I'm not really in it too much. But that's something that I've had to be really conscious of because I'm doing like an all Barry recital this semester. So you have to really be conscious of like where you're distributing weight and how long you stand, how you're standing. So that's definitely something that's always on my mind for sure.
Sure. So how are you navigating that? Like, are you using anything to prop it up, or like what is your method for doing that?
um, Typically, I'll just take breaks because it's like it's just tiring after a while having, especially standing up. So most often when I'm practicing, since I want to practice in longer sessions, I'll just sit down because that's easier and less strain on the body.
Mm.
But then I'll notice myself kind of hunching over, so I have to be careful of that too. But whenever I'm standing, whenever I'm like in between pieces, I'll just take it off my neck and hold it on the ground just to give myself a little bit of a break.
Mm. Yeah, so kind of doing it in like little stints and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Kind of like exercise where you take breaks between your sets.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. What is the device you're using to hold up the saxophone?
I have a breathtaking neck strap. I have one of the potential berry specific ones that they have right now that they're testing out. So it's just a little bit thicker leather, so it's not gonna like bend as much when you have it on you.
Hmm.
And then also it's distributed more across the bottom of your neck and your back than it is on your neck. So it's not as
Ah,
much pulling you forward as pulling you down.
right, right. Ah, geez, I think that's my problem with posture.
Yeah,
It's like
for sure.
I kind of do
That
this.
hunch forward, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that today when I was eating lunch. I'm just like hunching over the plate eating a sandwich, you know.
Yeah.
So if I
And
play
then you sit up and
Barry,
you're like, "Oh, my back hurts." Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I mean, even
Yeah.
right now, like I know I'm moving around a lot, and I just something I definitely should have worked on 20 years ago. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Here I am, 31 years old, and I'm like, I don't know how to sit properly.
That and with Corona, it's like you're inside doing Zoom classes or Zoom
Yeah.
lessons, and so everything is inside sitting down. Your tendency to hunch is just way higher.
Right, yeah. So what has that been like? Because you're in your second year
Yeah, second year of the doctorate.
at Florida State, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So now that your first year, you were almost, well, half of it was in person, right?
Yeah, a little bit more than half, like three. We probably only lost one half of a semester.
Okay. Yeah. And then now
Yeah, it was after spring break.
you're fully on Zoom, or are you a hybrid between the two?
Hybrid. So both my classes are on Zoom where I'm in class, but then when I'm teaching and when I have my lessons, we do it in person. But
Oh,
they
really?
gave us like bigger classrooms so the students, I mean, we can be far apart and there's no issue.
Mm. Well, that's a funny thing because that relates to the sax quartet that you played of mine.
Yeah, really though. I'm used to standing across the room from people. It's fine.
That's so funny. So then that's something I'm kind of curious about is like with your students and talking about posture and stuff and playing
Hmm.
the baritone. Like, is that something that you bring onto students? At what point do students start playing the bari?
It can be at any point. I mean, students start playing in quartet pretty much as soon as they get to college,
Mm,
and if you, some may get assigned baritone, some may not. Some may never play bari. It's not always like a for sure thing. But I mean, you could really start at any point. But typically, I don't have too many students playing bari in lessons, so I haven't come across that too often, except for in quartet settings.
mm,
And
okay.
most of the time when they are doing it in quartet settings, I'm just making sure that they don't like move to the point where their embouchure is like getting all messed up because they're moving so much or they're standing a certain type of way.
Gotcha. Okay. So is the focus more on just embouchure development and everything?
Yeah, I think since it is such a larger instrument compared to alto, I mean the embouchure is essentially the same, but it's bigger, so there are things that
Mm,
you have to adjust. And so some people have trouble since it is so big, they kind of just let their embouchure flail a little bit, and then you get like
mm.
puffed cheeks or your jaw moves a lot, and you just have to remind them it's still an embouchure. You can't just let it go wild.
Right. Is that like what I mean, this is obviously trumpet, but what was his name? Louis Armstrong, right?
With the cheeks.
With the cheeks. Is that a similar thing, or?
It's I mean, kind of, yeah, that's definitely something, I don't really know too much about why he did that, but we want to control those cheeks, not let extra air just sit in it. So,
Right. Ah, yeah, that's true. So what is something then that you've noticed like with teaching where that students that is almost like a universal thing with students that you need to be focusing on this more?
oh man, there's so many things. It's I think something saxophone specific is we tend to move everything too much. especially when it comes to embouchure and tongue position.
Mm.
There's like kind of two schools of thought on this, where it's like the idea of voicing, and then so it's like Fred Hemke from Northwestern taught didn't really focus on that much. He focused purely on musical expression, so he didn't really instruct like move your tongue this way or that way so much. But then you had Donald Cinta at University of Michigan, who did teach voicing, and so there's like those two trains of thought on how to teach the saxophone. And so this is something that I actually had conversations with a lot of my teachers, is how much do you actually instruct to move, because most students will end up moving too much.
Mm.
So the fun thing is that it's really easy to diagnose too if they're moving too much, because you can actually see their chin moving, like the bottom of their chin, because every time you move your tongue, like it moves your bottom of your chin. So it's really easy to diagnose when they're doing too much.
That's wild. It's like a frog.
Yeah, it is. And some students play like that too. So that's always kind of funny.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, through your studies, I mean, you've gone through. Um, I don't even know where you did your undergrad in South
South
Carolina.
Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, and then masters at Bowling Green,
Hmm.
and then now you're at Florida. What has the transition between the different studios been like in regards to, like you said, there's two schools of thought with
Yeah.
embouchure, right? So like, how has that been kind of going between the different programs?
It's very interesting. I mean, I'm really glad. Like my first degree, that was under the Donald Cinta School of Thought, and then both degrees now, since then, have been under Hemke. Like
Mm.
they've both been Hemke students. So I've gotten both perspectives, and I think they both have valid arguments. And I think the general trend is you need to do both, but just not be so extreme. You know,
Right.
like everyone voices. It's just, do you talk about it, and how much do you talk about it, and how much do you train it, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's been super useful to hear both, because, when I came out of my undergrad, I feel like I came out super technically strong, but I wasn't always listening to musical line, and that's not any fault of my teacher. It was just where I was. And then I got to Bowling Green, and Dr. Sampin didn't really talk about voicing at all. He just talked about musical expression. So that really helped me round out a lot. And then I felt like by now it's mostly just like detail work with Dr. Dybel, and talking about making sure that everything we play is really musical, and fixing those little things where I have tendencies of going too far in either direction.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. I like what you said about kind of trying both things out,
Yeah.
because then you're you're sort of equipping yourself with more resources
Yep.
in regards to finding solutions to potential problems, or yeah, I guess solutions to problems with playing.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think a little bit about, because you're talking about going from one school to the next, and the different schools of thought with how to play, is the whole idea with classical, like student performers, student composers, just anyone studying music in college, is the whole idea of when you go from your bachelor's to your master's, studying with at a new school, like to try to get that perspective, to get a new
Mm,
perspective, I guess.
yeah,
And but then there are some people who kind of just stay in one place and
for
go
sure.
bachelor's, master's, doctorate. you know I
Yeah.
think the point you just mentioned is a good one to to uh, to bring up for that sort of discussion. What sort of things have you kind of recognized that might be a fault in that, or a flaw in that system?
Yeah. One thing to consider when you are doing that is, I mean, a lot of people go through in one school of thought, and that's totally fine. I think that gives you more consistency. One thing that I found it myself now is, now that I have those perspectives, I'm kind of wrestling with like what I want to keep from both. So sometimes it can lead me to being indecisive, I guess, about things.
Mm.
Or, I mean, so it's just interesting having that wider perspective. um, I feel like sometimes can be a hindrance whenever you're trying to make decisions on what you want to do. Like, for instance, I was playing cello transcription for Dr. Dybel recently, and in the first three notes, I was doing something that involved the voicing to get it in tune, but it was sacrificing some of the tone quality of one of my notes. So we literally spent like 30 minutes on three notes of the piece, just deciding what was appropriate, how to make it in tune, all that stuff. And like, it's pretty ridiculous that you can spend that long on three notes, but it's like that's the detail work that you get used to doing, of course, in graduate school.
Right. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy to think about, especially if anyone who watches this that's not a musician or anything, and they're like, "You spent that
Yeah.
much time playing three notes?" Like,
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't that long, but it was a while.
oh yeah, but that is, I know that is the case. I mean, when I was studying guitar and stuff, I did it in my undergrad, so I never went to the master's level of studying
Yeah.
guitar or anything like that. But just talking to my instructors about how long should I be doing scales, or how long should I be working on like legato exercises and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and and it's not really so much like a prescription that you can um, like something you could prescribe,
Yeah.
because obviously every person's going to be different, right?
For sure.
But yeah, I don't know, man. It's it's a weird sort of thing in many ways, like we spend all this time focusing on this one thing, and then when we go into the performance, and then the performance happens, and it's like, I did it.
Yeah. You do
Like,
it. You all that time in prepping for like 5 minutes of music. Yep.
right, but then
Yeah.
we also get so hard on ourselves too in
Yeah.
performance, where if we miss one note, but then it's like, well, you got 99% of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know like, what is something that you think, like you said before, you have like a certain indecisiveness when it comes to figuring out which sort of avenue you should go down to correct something. Do you have a sort of method for that at all, or like, what do you think might be an effective way to for someone who might be having the same issue as you with that?
Yeah, I think this was part of the conversation I had with my professor I think it was last week or while ago. I think if you're having trouble with those decisions, in the end, the musical lines should be the one that dictate what decision you make. Like, for instance, when I was doing it without any input, I was sacrificing a little bit of the musical line just to get that note, in tune. But in the end, like, I'm probably going to get the note in tune, but I need to focus on creating that smooth line. So, it's like I will keep it in tune, obviously, but I was changing the tone quality to do it. And that's like a sacrifice that you don't want to make. So I guess for me, it's like making sure that I'm preserving the musical line no matter what I'm doing.
Mm.
That's probably the
that's
most important thing.
I like that. I mean, you're sort of creating like a hierarchy in order for you to get to the point where you
Hmm.
feel like the piece needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's fantastic. And it makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah.
It can help eliminate, like you said, help eliminate those. Oh, what should I be doing to fix this?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I've mentioned too when I was I had my assistantship at Bowling Green, which is
Hmm.
where we met, and
Yeah.
we'll get into that in a moment. But uh, is telling people when they're working on their 4-part chorales or their theory and stuff, is like, don't just sit there with a pencil and paper. Go to the piano, play the
See how
line,
it sounds.
see what it
Yeah.
sounds like. Yeah, and that can help you understand, like, oh, this is a 2-6-5 chord or something, or like whatever.
Yeah.
So but yeah, so let's get into that a little bit. So we met at Bowling Green State University while we were getting our master's degrees.
Hmm.
um could you go a little bit into the circumstances in which we met? Do you remember that?
When did we meet? I feel like Bowling Green, like you meet so many people all at once because like the atmosphere there is like you go out to a bar and meet people, like that's what you do in Bowling Green because there's pretty much nothing else to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to think of like when did we meet? I can't remember, to be honest.
I don't exactly remember. I don't remember the specific moment, but
Mm,
I know the way we started interacting was through my sax quartet that I wrote.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Do you remember how that came to be?
I remember you approach the quartet and ask if you'd be willing to play it. I what that's
I don't know if I approached you guys. I had originally written the piece. See, this is the funny thing, and
mm,
I think your expertise in the piece and as a saxophonist can clear this up much better than I could. I originally wrote that piece for the undergraduate sax quartet.
oh, really?
That's the reaction I thought. Yeah.
Nice.
So can you go into a little bit of detail as to why that probably was a bad idea?
Um, there's a lot of notation that an undergrad may not have run into at that point. I mean, even for me as a master's student, there was a lot of notation that I wasn't 100% sure on either, just
Mhm.
because my undergrad wasn't super contemporary focused. But that was one thing. The second thing is communication was difficult in that piece, just because it's set up to where you're in four corners of a room. So you kind of have to communicate over like a span of 20, 30 feet, depending on how big the room is. And
Right.
then, of course, there was some difficult time signature changes with complicated interlocking patterns. So, there's just a lot of little things that make the effect really awesome. But whenever you try and get maybe a younger group to do it, it could be difficult.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird, man. Whenever I think back on it, I'm like, God, I tried to write this for undergrads. Like, I was not effective in that at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure they could get it. Like, it would just take a little bit of deciphering and help from someone a little older, maybe.
Right, yeah, and that's not to say that like undergraduate saxophone performers are incapable of doing
Yeah,
that
yeah, of
either.
course.
You
Yeah,
know, it's just it's not it's a challenging sort of feat.
yeah,
Even just the concept alone of all four performers standing in the four corners of the audience.
yeah,
Like that totally removes, or it makes, like you said, the communication is so much harder. You know,
yeah.
like because you're
And
not.
especially for young quartets too, because I mean, they have trouble communicating in close quarters. So,
Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
what was that like for you then? Like how did you get to the point where you're like, okay, I feel better about this, whether you feel comfortable or like
Yeah, so at first we of course did practice it close because I mean we had limited rehearsal space, but that helped just to solidify what we were listening for. And then of course we score studied a lot and made sure that we knew, like there was like I said, there's a lot of interlocking things where you have one person go, then the next, then the next, then the next on every quarter note or some equivalent. So we made sure that we marked in our scores where like cues from other people were coming in so that you could use your ears and not rely on your eyes since you are so far apart.
right. Yeah, that I thought was really clever for you when I came to the first rehearsal where you all performed it and I got
Hmm.
to hear it. It was the first time I actually got to hear it, at all.
Yeah.
And I remember I sat right in the middle of all of you,
Hmm.
and you were probably spread out like at least 20 feet apart.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea, was to create that stereophonic effect with the sound,
Hmm.
like, soprano, alto, then the tenor enters, then Barry, and when you had mentioned that you started in close quarters and then gradually worked your way outward, you
Hmm.
know, I mean, that right there already changes the experience of the piece, because obviously the closer you are together, you can hear more of the nuance
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
player to player, and then as
For
you
sure.
spread out, it's like that nuance is gone.
Yeah. That and the interesting thing was when you are close together, you get an idea of what the piece sounds like as a whole. But
Mm,
when you are 20, 30 feet apart, being honest, like you're really only listening to yourself to a certain degree because like everything is so far away. So
mm.
like it's a bummer that I never got to experience the piece in the middle because like you miss out on so much of that effect because it's just one voice essentially when you're that far away.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the things that with the recording we did with Steven,
Yeah.
shout out to Steven Hennessy. He recorded it using that microphone
Yeah.
that can like capture like omnipresent sounds, like surround sound.
Yeah.
I don't think that recording is still even done yet. But even to listen to experience that, you'd have to be in a room that has surround sound speakers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you just had like a two speaker setup, it still wouldn't be the same.
Yeah. Not quite. Yeah.
But hopefully sooner or later we'll have that ready, and then you could
Yeah.
experience it.
Perfect. I'm excited.
All that hard work you could put into it, and you'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, that's what it
I
sounds
finally
like.
get to listen to it. Yeah.
Or it might be one of those instances where you work on three notes for an hour and then you perform it, you're like, there it is.
Yep.
Like,
And it's over. Yep.
there's nothing left.
Yep.
Yeah, that was amazing though. I mean, yeah, I have to say, man, it was awesome coming into that rehearsal. And
Hmm.
then I know you guys, I think you performed it 2 times, and the each time it was like you just nailed it. You put it together in 2 weeks, I think, too, right?
Yeah, luckily, I mean, really the hardest part of that was putting it together. Like the notes and I mean all that stuff, half of it you're making sounds through your mouthpiece. So it's not like it's technically difficult at all. So it was just putting it together and luckily we had a group that was strong enough that could put it together really quickly.
Yeah, solid players. I mean, Claire Sally on
Hmm.
alto, right?
I can't even remember at this point. I think so, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She was on alto.
Soren Ham on soprano.
Hmm.
You, Mr. Jonathan Kierspe on tenor,
Yep.
right? And then Piapon, how do you say his last name?
Asawan Janikit.
Asawan
Ooh, I really
Janakit.
hope that was right. His last name is very hard to pronounce.
That's all right. Every time I see it, I'm like, there's A's, and then
There's a lot of letters in
there's
there.
a lot of
Yep.
letters. It's a hard one, but
Yep.
he was on the baritone,
Yeah.
and yeah, you were all just like serious rock stars about that. You know, it was you
Yeah. It was a
handled
lot
it.
of fun. I mean, again, like that was the first time I'd played anything like that. So for me, it was like a whole new world of sounds. It was fun.
That's one of the things I hear all the time, and my personal experience of Bowling Green definitely reflects is the
Yeah.
new music and contemporary styles and stuff like that. What was your like coming to Bowling Green? What was that like for you?
It was definitely interesting transition because I mean, we played I mean, there was contemporary music at my undergraduate, but typically it was the graduate students doing it, because we would get through our standards. You know, you got to get through the standards before you move on to that in some, some cases. So I really hadn't played anything that was too out there.
Mm.
So coming to Bowling Green, I knew that was going to be the case, and that was something I was excited about because I wanted to experience it. And I, at first, I thought, oh, I don't actually like this stuff, but then when you get there, you get immersed into it. You start to understand it more, and you're starting to understand that it's not like a melody. Obviously, you're listening for sounds, and you learn to appreciate the sounds of things more. So I had a lot of fun kind of diving into that at Bowling Green because I mean it's just everywhere. Like you can't avoid it at Bowling Green. It was really fun. I really appreciated that experience.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I think one thing is like you said, you can't avoid it, like not in a bad way, but it's just like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
always happening.
yeah.
There's always performances, and
That's
there's
one thing. Yeah, yeah.
always guest artists. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, especially with like the new music festival and whatnot,
Yeah.
which is happening this month. Um, usually at the end of the month, but
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Now it's going to be virtual, so
Oh, interesting.
that is interesting. But what is something with Bowling Green like that? I mean, I don't want to say just like your most memorable experience or something like that, but like things that it was like the fact that this happens makes me feel like I'm in the right place.
Yeah. Um, I think the constant collaboration with the comp majors was probably one of the highlights for me. Just
Mhm.
because, like, number one, y'all were fun people and it was a lot of fun hanging out with you. But number two, it was like you guys were constantly outputting stuff and constantly like encouraging us to play it. So I mean, we never had a shortage of music to play, you know? And it was always like fun adventures trying to decipher them and play them for you guys and like the Percepta concerts and stuff like that. I mean, there was just constant opportunities to perform. So even though you are in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio, like that little ecosystem that is Bowling Green is very self-sufficient when it comes to providing opportunities to perform. And that's something that, I mean, I don't think many other schools have anything like that. So that was a lot of fun, and I think that's probably one of the things that I appreciated the most.
Yeah, you know, I have to I'm totally with you on that. And I've heard from other people who have gone to schools that are actual conservatories,
Hmm.
and they said like, "Oh yeah, we had two guest speakers this year." And I'm like, "Dude, we had like three in 1 month, man."
Yeah.
Like, you know. So I think that's a really good way that you put it. And one thought that I have, because you know, obviously being a composer, I didn't have this sort of experience, but
Hmm.
being a performer, a graduate student at Bowling Green,
Hmm.
what was it? What was the challenge like of balancing coursework, like studio obligations, assistantship if you had one,
Hmm.
like performing works by composers? Like,
Yeah.
what was that like for you?
Um, it was not too bad actually. The coursework at Bowling Green for your master's degree really isn't that intense. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a master's degree, so you only have to take, a certain amount of credits every semester. It's not a lot of work. Um, and my assistantship was the Woodwind Methods teaching assistantship. So I taught it like twice a week at 8 a.m. And outside of that, I had some like organizational work in lockers and all that kind of stuff. So it really wasn't too much work for school itself. Um, the biggest thing for me was I came out of my undergrad realizing that my CV was just bare. You know, I had done a couple stuff, but I hadn't really commissioned anything. I'd maybe done three premieres of something, just not too many things. So at Bowling Green, my focus that whole time was just performing as many times as you can. So I made a point to do a recital every semester, even though they weren't super heavy recitals. I made sure to do recitals every semester. I tried to participate in a lot of the Percepta things just to bulk up my resume.
Right. Were you and that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely want to get into that a little bit, but You were involved with that. Was it what piece was it in the New Music Festival? It was like a big production. Was it the Reich? What was
Uh, I don't think I was part of anything that big
no?
for the New Music Festival. We did an octet one year, and we
Mhm.
did a quartet and maybe a quintet piece at one. I can't even remember what we played, to be honest.
Okay,
I don't think I was in anything that big.
I might be thinking of my first year then.
Yeah.
There was I think it was like a piece for I don't know, like 15 saxophones or something. And supposedly it was the second time it's ever been performed, and it was first
Hmm.
performed in France, I think.
Interesting. Yeah,
I,
I
I
definitely I wasn't part of that one.
okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of Bowling Green is just like
Yeah.
everything happens, and then
That's
now
the truth.
you're in the world, you know.
Yep. Yep. I feel
So
that.
yeah, yeah. Uh, but so can you for anyone who any performers who might who are listening to this or watch this,
Hmm.
um, can you go into the reason why bulking up your CV, like you said before, like why that matters?
Yeah, well, I knew that I wanted to eventually get into a doctoral program and hopefully teach at a collegiate level. And that's, I mean, obviously the things they look for are like performance things that you do, service things that you do, and research that you do. So, I mean, I had done minimal research. Obviously, you're in your undergrad, so that's not a huge focus. I had done service stuff, that was fine, but I had not performed outside of a school setting, which is again probably the most important thing because everyone does recitals, everyone does things that are required by the school, like ensembles,
Mhm.
but they want to see that you're doing extra, you know? So for me, it was really important to show that I was active to future degrees and future job applications. So I made sure that, I was just performing all the time and commissioning stuff and playing a lot. But I don't know, there was no, like, that's pretty much the biggest reason was because I knew I wanted to continue in school.
Mhm. Gotcha. Yeah. Well, that is very useful for sure. With services, you mean like community service sort of stuff, or?
Well, not necessarily that, but like for instance, if there's like an organization that you're a leadership for, or if you were, stuff like that to show. Because I remember someone telling me, it might have been the flute professor here at Florida State, that that is a large part of what they look at when you're applying to job applications.
Mhm.
That you're actually doing stuff to serve the community, like putting on concerts for people or something like that, so that it's not just this little bubble and that you're like attracting people other than musicians.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's definitely. I think one thing that you said before is really pivotal. Is oh, what'd you say exactly? Oh, I don't remember what it was, but basically just like to bulk up your CV, showing that you're
Hmm.
doing more than
Yeah.
what is required, right?
Yep. For
And
sure.
that sort of makes me think a lot about people who are going to schools or at least applying to schools that are like the name schools, right?
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I got into Juilliard, I'm good to go.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that statement?
um, if that's all you're going off of, I think you're a little screwed. It is.
Okay.
I think it's great to go to those schools. I'm not bashing any name schools at all, I promise. But like, if all you're doing is going to that school and kind of coasting, I don't think you're going to be successful. You have to, like, this is something that my professor here at Florida State has been talking a lot with in the studio. He uses the words consuming the curriculum as a negative, in as in you're just doing the bare minimum of what is required of you. And his whole point was that he wants our studio to be one that exceeds the curriculum and does more than is required so that you can actually make an impact, in any way, shape, or form, have an impact on something.
Well, right there, man. Like you just gave a great testimonial for your school,
Yeah.
or at least for the sax studio.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
anyone listening who's a saxophonist right now, like apply to
Yep.
FSU. But that I think is really important. A lot
It
of
is.
people, and yeah, like you said, not to say that going to Juilliard or any of these schools, Harvard or whatever, it's like great, do that. That's awesome, please.
Yeah.
But to assume that to assume that having that stamp is going to get you the opportunities you're hoping to achieve,
Hmm.
that doesn't you know
Yeah, for
it can
sure.
it can help.
It can help for sure. Oh, I'm definitely not denying that, but it's not the end all.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why I wanted to kind of go into it a little bit more when you said you have to do more than just what the curriculum is saying,
Hmm.
you know. And I think that's a really great sort of, I don't know what the word is, like just way to live in general, you know.
Hmm.
If you applied that to other aspects of your life, you know, like your relationship with your significant other,
Hmm.
it's like at the bare minimum you're exclusive with them, you know. That's at the bare minimum,
Bare minimum. Yep.
you know. But then you also need to like try, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and it's but then going above and beyond, like the whole in entrepreneurial circles they say under promise over deliver,
Yep.
you know. So it's like, hey man, I'll cut your lawn for you, but then it's like not only do you cut their lawn, you like make the edges look really clean.
Hmm.
You know, you take up all the sticks and stones, you put them away, and then all of a sudden they have like a brand new lawn,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
I don't know where I went into lawn like maintenance or
Hey, it
landscaping.
works. The analogy works. It's fine.
Yeah, oh my god. But so okay, so we talked about like CVs and stuff and building that up, and then in order to position yourself better so that you can end up in a doctoral program and hopefully sooner or later become a professor, right?
Yeah.
So what has your experience been thus far in a doctoral program that it wasn't exactly what you had thought of? And I don't mean that in a bad way either. Like
Yeah.
whatever your expectations were going into it, and then it was something different.
That's a good question. I feel like I had a pretty good grasp on what it would be like because I've been in quartets and I've, known a lot of doctoral students, so I had the gist of what it would be like.
Mhm.
I think something specifically at Florida State I kind of knew I was getting into. The studio here is pretty large just because it's a large school, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just how it is, right? But that means the graduate students have a lot more workload. I think when it comes to our teaching load, there's just more students, which is again nothing wrong. It's actually a great experience, and I'm loving it. But I think the first year I was here, I think that was a challenge for me because I was teaching, I think, 14 students. Not all of them were hour-long lessons a week, but I was teaching a quartet, and I guess it was a quartet and 13 students. So there was just a lot of scheduling stuff you had to do, and then finding time to practice. And then my quartet was trying to do some competitions and perform a lot of difficult music. So I think that balance was difficult because master's degree, like I said, the coursework was not a lot. There was a lot of time in your day where you could dedicate to practice, do whatever you need to do, function, be a human being. But when you get to your doctorate, like you kind of have like these hours that you get that are so precious sometimes.
Mm.
COVID right now it's not as bad, of course, since everything is online. You don't have that travel time to deal with, but that first year here, it was just like, oh my gosh, there's so much you need to do. So I was at school like 12 hours a day.
Right.
Pretty
Okay.
insane.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a lot. Do you mind if we kind of keep going with that to give people
Sure.
some more insight who might be thinking about doctoral programs or at least on the
Yeah.
fence with it?
Sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the coursework is a lot more, and depending on where you're studying, your teaching load might be a lot too.
Yeah.
What do you have a general idea of like what your weekly schedule looks like in regards to like how much you have to dedicate to teaching, how much you have to dedicate to doing your schoolwork, how much time you have for practice and performance? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of hard because COVID, again, it's a little different now. The coursework here is not actually that bad. It's
mhm,
more work than a master's, but it's not by much. They're
mhm,
just harder classes generally because you're at a DMA level. But generally, my week, I have currently 8 students, and two of them are every other week. So I guess I have 7 students a week, and so that's 7 hours of teaching.
mhm,
That's typically, I think, a little bit more than the average graduate student is teaching. I'm not sure because haven't been to other programs, but from what I've heard, I feel like that's a couple more students than most programs. I'm very happy to have it though, just because it's like you're in a studio setting. Like this is, I have a job, like I'm teaching students. I have almost a full studio of students, so it's great experience for me. I'm actually enjoying it a lot because I love teaching, but it's different than most programs because it's a lot.
yeah,
So that was huge chunk of my week is 8 hours of teaching just regular students. And then if you're in a quartet, quartets can rehearse anywhere from like 5 hours a week to however many hours if you're doing competitively. So last semester and or last year in general, we were rehearsing 1 or 2 hours a day. So that was a huge chunk of time. Also, was just ensemble work,
Mhm.
and then you have your coaching, of course, on top of that. Um, Regular practice time, anywhere from 2 to 3, 4 hours a day. Who knows, depending on the day, depending on how much time, and how much energy you have.
Yeah.
So there's just like a lot of. It's like individually, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you put it together, that's just a lot of hours in the day of being in a practice room or in a rehearsal. Class wise, not so much, but yeah,
Right, yeah, and then we also have to account for our time commuting.
yeah.
Like, do you live on campus? Are you?
I'm about 2 miles off of campus, but here last year, I mean, Florida State, they have free parking for everyone, which is nice, but that means everyone parks. So
Mm,
it's if you don't get to school by like 8:30, you kind of have to hunt for parking or pay for a meter.
right.
So like you kind of have to just get there early, or else you're gonna suffer drive around for 40 minutes. So there's like little things like that too, where you kind of have to just get there at a certain time, or else you just won't be able to find parking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of colleges like that, even when
Yeah,
you pay for parking.
yeah, seriously.
My undergrad, I went to Montclair State University in New Jersey,
Yeah,
and the time when I started going there, I think it was 2011. They built up parking structures, so they had different levels to park on, and no one wants to park on like the eighth level,
yeah,
so that was always available.
yeah,
But all like the ground parking and like the first two levels of the parking garages filled up like
yeah.
by 8:30. Yeah, you
For
know.
sure. Yeah, we have
So
multiple like 4-story ones that fill up by 8:30.
right, yeah, man. I mean, people they get the good spot. You know,
Yeah.
uh, it's the way of the wolf, I guess.
Yeah. I enjoy that's one nice thing about the new atmosphere at campus is parking is very easy. So that's one thing
Right.
I don't mind so much.
There's some interesting silver linings
Yeah.
with the COVID. You know,
Yep, for
I
sure.
mean, it's yeah. I think like we were saying before is being more self-aware of your mental health is one of them.
Yeah.
Because all of us have been affected,
Yeah.
and our mental health has been affected greatly. You
Hmm.
know, it's such a weird balance. And is that something that you've experienced with your students, like having students who are like sort of, you know, burning out because of it?
Yeah, I definitely feel like last semester was way worse with that just because it was kind of abrupt and no one was ready for it.
Mm,
So, I mean, even I had trouble keeping on top of things at the end of last semester just because you were just kind of like thrown out of school so quickly. But this semester, it hasn't been so bad. I like to check in on my students like at the beginning of the lessons and be like, hey, was this a good week or a bad week? Like how are we going to be doing in this lesson? Just so I can like get a gauge of like, should I be strict teacher today or should I be a little bit more lax?
right.
Just because like I do want to keep that in mind. Like this is hard and students have rough weeks sometimes. So I try and be a little bit more forgiving without just kind of letting them abuse that. But that's the hard part is figuring out when it becomes they're abusing that power versus it's actually been a rough week. I don't think anyone's abusing that right now. I don't think I've had that happen, but I'm always thinking about that.
Right, right. And remember, all of Jonathan's students, you are all amazing. And
You're
Jonathan
great. I
loves you
love you
all.
so much.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's a weird time. And that's a really great thing that you're doing is checking in on them to make sure, like, how are you feeling this week? Are you okay?
Yeah.
What is something that you think when you look back on to what was it, like 6 months ago, 7 months ago, when the quarantine started,
Hmm.
we all had this crazy transition. Um, what is something you think you could have done a little bit more smoothly in regards to pivoting?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think I kind of let myself flail when it came to routine. I think I function much better when there's a structured routine in
Mm,
my daily life. Whenever I have too much free time or I have time that I don't have dedicated to a certain thing, it's really hard for me to stay on track because there's distractions in life. So I think I kind of gave myself too long of a gap between when the quarantine started and when I brought my routine back. So that just kind of made it so I never quite got my good routine back. It was always like a kind of secondary routine after that, especially last semester, just because it was really abrupt. But
right.
I think making sure that I kept a routine would have been really helpful.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. I mean, it's such a like I said, it's a weird transition, you know,
Yeah,
and none of us are were ready for it or like knew
yeah,
how to handle it, you know.
for real.
Um, but that's a good way to kind of recognize some how you can handle it if it were to happen again, or even just in
Yeah,
general, like recognizing the importance of maintaining a routine,
yeah,
because that is the one thing you can control.
yeah, for sure.
you know it's like I know how difficult it is for a lot of people seeing like things that are happening in the world today with politics
Hmm.
and the environment and all this other stuff and whatnot. Um, there's a certain point I think where uh, if you at least have your own life in balance in some capacity, like a
Hmm.
schedule, you'll feel a little bit better, you know.
Yeah,
But I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm coming from a point of my own, it's my own sort of perspective and experience, where other
yeah,
people they're gonna have something different, and that's fine.
yeah. And I'm sure it's different for everyone too, just because we're different people. But me
Yeah,
personally, I just function better with a routine.
exactly. Yeah, me too. Me too. One thing that I want to bring up because it's something that still affects me today,
Mm.
and I don't know if you've had this experience or not, but what is your sleep like during school when you're in grad school and doctoral program? Do you sleep well? And this is a very serious question too.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. There are good weeks and there are bad weeks. I will say that. There are certain days like I've had to make a point of like putting my phone away from the bed just so I'm not watching videos until late, whatever it may be. So there's certain things and certain habits that I'm trying to develop to make sure that I can get that consistent sleep routine.
Mm.
Um, but I like sleeping a lot. I'm one of those people that enjoys sleep a lot, so I try and make sure that I get like 8 hours of sleep, or else I will get very grumpy.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, it's important that I get sleep. There's certain days where like my brain's racing, and I'll just take some melatonin to help calm it down a
Mm.
little bit. But generally, I think my sleep is not too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think that's important too because I know in grad school, like for me, it was a challenge, like trying to get this done, and I'm grading this assignment, and like thinking about this event that has to happen and stuff, and
Yeah.
so I imagine that a lot of other like music students are having a similar sort of issue,
Hmm.
but I don't really hear people talk about it,
Yeah.
and it's just sort of like laughed about. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not sleeping. I don't sleep at all. Like the way the world is,
Yeah.
I can't sleep. But
Yeah.
but when you talk about the fact that going through the quarantine transition, like you said, your schedule, it's like the amount of time you have to spend practicing and rehearsing and working with students and coursework, and then it's like to have all that energy, you also need to have all that rest too.
Yeah. For sure.
It's so pivotal.
Yeah.
But I think the phone thing is a big one.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us struggle with like having our phones with us laying in bed, like
Yeah. For
getting
sure.
getting that fix.
Yeah, the way I look at it is if I mean your brain is functioning the least when you're on your phone or watching TV because you can literally that's when it's like actually functioning the least instead of when like opposed to sitting there and doing nothing, you're actually thinking a lot more, your brain's a lot more active.
Mm.
So if for me whenever I'm on my phone a lot right before bed, my brain's off when I'm watching whatever I'm watching. But then as soon as I turn that phone off and actually try and sleep, that's when it kind of kicks on and then it goes into overdrive because I've been ignoring it for so long.
Yeah.
So I have to be
Oh,
super careful about what I do at night so that my brain doesn't kick on when I'm actually trying to sleep.
see, that's exactly what I'm talking about because I have the
Yeah.
same problem,
Hmm.
and I imagine that, and that's like great self-awareness on your part too for recognizing like I need to be very strategic about my
Yeah.
routine before bed, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's like it's something that I don't know if we're even really taught very much like how to sleep, like
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely not in schools for sure, but
but
important.
at the same time it's like no one anticipated social media and technology and stuff to
Yeah,
to
that's
to
true.
get to where it is, so it's
Yeah.
like you kind of can't shift there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad you said the things you said though.
Yeah.
And I know you got to get going very soon, but I want to bring up sax reel. Let's
Oh
talk
yeah.
about sax reel. your
Sure.
your podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about what sax reel is all about?
Yeah, so the inspiration behind the podcast was my professor at Bowling Green, Dr. Sampin. Um, he's had a lot of really unique experiences in life. He's been able to do a lot of things that many people were not able to do. Like he traveled to the USSR and like performed there and did a lot of cool stuff in France and all over the world. And he just has this wealth of knowledge and stories that I really wanted to tap into. So I thought I would start chronicling people's stories and thoughts on pedagogy and thoughts on studio culture and what they're working on and everything to try and help promote them a little bit. So essentially, what I did was I got in contact with a bunch of saxophonists from around America, and I interviewed them and got some stories, some fun, some more serious, a wider range, I guess, of stories from them. And then I made it into a podcast.
That's amazing. I love that. There's so much that you're offering with that. Like for one thing, the guests on this show, it's like their legacies can continue,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that
And
was a huge part of what I wanted to capture.
yeah, that's such a precious thing right there. Yeah,
Hmm.
because and that's so true is that the people who we study with, like our mentors, our professors, whatever you want to say, it's like they have these experiences that, when you talk to them, it's like, wow, you got to hang out with that person
Right? Yeah.
and eat
You knew this
cheesecake.
composer? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and
Yeah.
Sampin, of course, him and Marilyn Shrewd, like
Yeah. They've been everywhere.
their history is just vast.
Yep.
They've
Yep.
done so many things with so many people. Yeah, so you recently finished your first season in a way, right?
Yeah. I finished season one. I'm taking a little bit of a break now, but it'll come back hopefully towards the end of the semester.
Gotcha. Yeah, man. Well, hey, gotta have that keep that mental energy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The
It's
what we were
sometimes exhausting setting up those meetings with people who are also busy.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I was doing some very kind of over the phone interviews with some pedagogues, and
Hmm.
it wasn't terribly challenging, but it was still like you kind of have to work with their schedule a lot of the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's okay. But
Yeah. Not the worst. It's just a lot of, time.
yeah, so you had your first season of Sax Reel.
Hmm.
You're going into your second, at some point. What are some things that you sort of learned in going through this process because you've never had a podcast before, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the first one.
Yeah. So what has it been like? Like it's like, oh wow, I have this thing now, and now you have not only like the experience but the knowledge of doing it and stuff.
Hmm.
What are some things now? It's like you don't have to give anything away either. Like
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want you to kind of spell anything like, oh, season 2 is gonna have these things or whatever. But
Yeah. Well, it's not even planned yet, so that's not possible.
all right, oh there you go. But
Yeah.
but yeah. So what has that been like for you?
It's definitely been an interesting process. I think since my podcast is mostly based off of I mean, people I'm interviewing, it largely depends on their input, which is one thing that I'm gonna hopefully maybe adjust, just because it makes it a little bit too free reign sometimes.
Mhm.
So naturally, there's some people who like to talk a lot, and there's some people who don't. So sometimes you like have to drag it out of them, or you have to slow them down. Any number of things when it comes to interviewing people. So I think the biggest challenge for me was kind of guiding the conversation in a timely manner and getting to all the points and making sure that at least some part was like really really interesting, really applicable, really useful information so that every episode had some like gem in it.
Yeah, well, and that's what I liked. I mean, I listened to a few episodes and it was like it just felt really kind of natural,
Hmm.
and like the interaction was very genuine too,
Yeah.
which I think is important. Like a lot of people, they want that authenticity, that like
Yeah.
that genuine, um, whereas where you watch like, I don't know, an interview on like NBC News,
Hmm.
like it sometimes can feel kind of sterile in a way,
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
but
Luckily, I mean, I started with a lot of people that I knew or people that I was more comfortable talking to,
mhm.
just so that it was easier for me. It's like the first podcast, first interview that I'd done. And one thing that I have to be very conscious of is I'm a fast talker, so I really have to think sometimes about slowing down. And
Mm.
I think that's one thing that I need to focus on more in the second season, because there's sometimes I'm listening to myself when I'm editing the audio. I'm just like, holy cow, how do you talk so fast? It's a
Yeah,
struggle.
I understand it, man. I mean, you've known me for a few years. We've had plenty of nights together,
Yeah.
getting drinks and stuff like that, and I get loud,
Yeah.
I mean, I get loud, and even in this conversation, I know I've gotten loud, but
Yeah.
it's hard to temper yourself,
It is. It's weird. It's a different format. You just kind of have to. I figured it would get better with time, just practicing. So it has, but still something I have to think about a little too actively for comfort.
Yeah, yeah, it's so weird, you know. It's like we've lived this life for so long so far, at least a few decades of life, and we're still trying to understand how to talk.
Right? I
You
think it's
know?
just the fact that you're recording it, you know? That adds this level of stress and like even if I'm talking to someone I know really well, there's like, oh, I have to make sure I ask good questions and I can't stumble over my words and all this other stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, I mean, you know, from what I heard, man, it sounded great. I'm
Thank you.
excited about it, and it's cool. And you're definitely providing, like I said, a great, you're offering a great service for the sax community, you know,
I sure hope so.
and the community in general. I mean, hearing people talk about their experiences
Hmm.
and how they handle things and what they've done and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, man. But so I think we could probably end it right there. But if there's anything else you want to tag on, any like I don't know, any events or any sort of things you got coming up, or some little nugget of advice for someone maybe that's looking into doctoral programs, or you know, that sort of thing.
Sure, I can give some advice on that. I think for me, one thing that I didn't do in my master's was prepare for the interviews. And I applied to places without thinking through. I mean, I applied to great schools, but I didn't think about all the reasons why I wanted to go there beforehand. I was like, oh, it's a great school, great teacher, I'll apply, you know? So I think doing your research on the schools is like, I mean, it's so crucial. And like finding out and like trying to remember other faculty members' names is also really important because then you can show whoever you're applying for that you know not just about them, but also the other people that you will potentially be working with or working under, you know? So learning little details like that, what ensembles you can play in, what events there are, all that kind of stuff makes a huge difference
Mm.
in the interview process. And then the other thing that I did, I maybe went a little too overboard with this, but I had like a list of 30 some questions just to show interest, you know? That's a huge part about the interview is making sure that you show interest in the school as a whole. So I asked a ton of questions about the professor, how the studio runs, how the instrument library works, all that stuff, all how the school is run, just to show them number one that like I can play after that audition, but also that I'm really genuinely interested in this specific school.
That's great, man. That's great. Sort of in a way that it's almost like you're also interviewing them,
Oh, 100%.
you
Yeah. I
know?
mean, when I go into it, I mentally for myself, that's what I say to make myself less nervous. Just because it's like, it's a different framework. You're in a whole different mindset. If you say, I'm interviewing you, do I want to study with you? You know? And of course, like, you need to do it in a humble way. Like, don't be a dick about it, but like, make sure that you are like not psyching yourself out and being like, am I worthy? You know? That
Yeah.
mentality is just not healthy.
Oh my God, that's fantastic, man. Well, that's a great spot right there to leave it off. So
Sure.
I'm going to stop the recording, but thank you so much for doing this, Jonathan. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
no problem.